Disclaimer: Rare Sense content is not medical advice, nor does it represent the official position or opinions of any other organization or person. If you require diagnosis or treatment for a mental or physical issue or illness, please seek it from a licensed professional. Hey guys, welcome to the Rare Sense podcast. This is Chris Irwin. This is the second half of my conversation with John Macaskill and Will Schneider of the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast. For roughly an hour, we discussed our experience taking psilocybin in a therapeutic group setting with Beckley Retreats in 2021. Beckley's programs include a 4-week virtual preparation phase, a 5-day on-site legal retreat outside the United States, and a 6-week virtual integration phase. I found their work to be extremely comprehensive and committed to best practices. To date, I've never spoken about psychedelics publicly in any capacity, but I've had numerous people ask my opinion on them. Since John, Will, and I went on this trip together, I felt that here was the appropriate opportunity to finally provide some commentary on the subject. However, please note that our discussion purely represents a narrative of what we went through and our personal opinions. It is not prescriptive in any way. None of us are medical professionals. I'm also going to combine this podcast episode with my monthly blog post, which I'm reading now, and offer some reflections on the Venn diagram consisting of drugs and mind fitness. These two topics can contain overlapping real estate, and the question I've always tried to answer in my case is, how large should that intersection be? Can drugs be part of my mental health journey or regimen? And if so, which ones? So for the next few minutes here, I'm going to read the rest of my monthly article to provide an audio version in addition to the written version, and then I'll move on to the actual podcast episode. First, it helps to clarify what most of us mean by drugs. I've always been given two basic definitions: a medicine or other substance which has a physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body, or a substance taken for its narcotic or stimulant effects, typically illegally. Put another way, there are good and bad ones. The former are synonymous with medicine, safe, salubrious, and therefore legal. They are prescribed by doctors or are available over the counter at your local aptly named drugstore. The latter are dangerous, potentially deadly, and justifiably against the law. They are sold by criminals lurking in dark alleys. For the longest time, this is precisely what I believed. I grew up in the 1980s when the war on drugs was prominently broadcasted across the airwaves, with famous slogans like "Just Say No." When it came to any bad drug, from cannabis to crack, I was repeatedly told to avoid them at all costs. These substances are simply hazardous to your health and of no benefit. And in the case of mind-altering substances like psychedelics, they are at the worst end of the spectrum. Not only are they addictive, but they can make you go crazy, jump off a building, or turn you into a vegetable after just one dose. They seem terrifying to me. I was also led to believe that what caused mental health conditions like anxiety and depression was an imbalance of chemicals such as serotonin in the brain. If you suffer in this way, it's not your fault. The gray matter in your head is simply defective. But luckily, pharmaceutical companies developed good drugs, like antidepressants, that correct this shortcoming. It's a temporary fix, but it works. You will feel better if you continue to take their proprietary pills for the rest of your life. But as I got older, I became critical of this conventional collective narrative for numerous reasons. I learned that most of what I had been told about psychedelics wasn't true. Books like Stealing Fire by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheal and How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan opened my eyes to the history of these compounds. Not only were many of them found in nature, but they'd also been used by various cultures for hundreds, if not thousands of years as medicine. And in the mid-20th century, scientists in the United States actively studied their potential therapeutic effects. I also started hearing about veterans successfully treating PTSD and other mental health conditions with only a few doses, sometimes with just one. Lastly, I found out there's basically no evidence that a lack of serotonin causes depression, nor do SSRIs seem to exhibit their purported chemical effect. Johan Hari details the history of mental health and prescription meds brilliantly in his book Lost Connections, which I highly recommend if you want to learn more. So if I were to summarize my findings, essentially I'd been lied to about certain drugs for my entire life. Some of the bad ones weren't bad, and many of the good ones weren't very good. Of course, that's not true with all of them. There are legitimate life-saving pharmaceuticals out there. I'm not telling anyone not to take medication their doctor prescribes if it works for them. And I think we can all agree that crystal meth probably isn't helping anyone. But I had to take a second look at the fundamental points of distinction between those two connotations I laid out before for the term drugs. Upon close inspection, I could only find one: legal status. It also seemed that what got something on the nice or naughty list wasn't always a matter of health benefits or safety. After all, the best scenario for any company that makes it consumable is to have as many people ingesting their product daily forever. I don't see why big pharma would be any different. It's mostly about money. So in my mid-40s, when faced with mental health problems that could potentially be treated with drugs, I was forced to stare down this reality. I had seen a psychiatrist who wanted to prescribe me SSRIs within 30 minutes of our first meeting. But I just couldn't accept this solution based on everything I've discussed thus far. I also had opportunities to try psychedelics in various settings. And while the horror stories I'd been told for most of my life still loom large in my mind, I'd spoken to enough people I trusted who seemed positively transformed by their use. However, I was still hesitant because I saw another issue with any drug used to treat mental health: disempowerment. By accepting chemical assistance, I was essentially acquiescing to the idea that my brain was broken in some fashion, that I was incapable of training my mind out of these problems. I never liked that idea, but I also realized that based on everything I'd learned about psychedelics, they might serve as more of a teacher than a drug. Maybe they could give me a new perspective I was having difficulty seeing. So I gave them a shot. And as you'll hear in the podcast, I believe the experience was beneficial, although by no means a cakewalk. Ultimately, I do think these substances can help people. That said, they are extremely powerful and definitely not for everyone. Regardless of its moniker, any medicine or drug should be treated seriously. And I'm certainly not here to tell anyone what they should or shouldn't ingest, imbibe, or inject. To each their own. On a larger scale, I've come to believe that anything you put in your body can technically be a drug. It doesn't matter if it's LSD, prescription pills, or things we don't even classify this way, like food and alcohol. You can go to a liquor store and purchase enough booze to put yourself in a coma. Overeat junk food for long enough and it will eventually kill you. Legally, we may view these things differently, but I think they're all just pieces of the same big cosmic cocktail of edible compounds. Any of them can be part of a healthy existence or contribute to your ultimate demise. Figuring out our own bespoke recipe while navigating the law is the challenge we all face. Personally, I hope that together we can worry less about preconceived notions, agendas, or profits, and more about actually helping people. Let's make that our target. I can't imagine why anything else should be of primary concern. Realizing that in order to get there, we need to start by having honest conversations. So open up and let's chat. Let's get into our shared experience.
Yes,
where
please.
We went on a very specific type of retreat and had some interesting experiences. For sure. We all did tiptoeing around it here, but we all did mushrooms together. We did it out of the country, obviously. But we did it as an organized retreat. We did this about a year plus ago, something
November
like that.
2021.
2021. And it's really how the three of us met. So, Will, certainly I hadn't met you before. John, I don't think you and we didn't work together in the military. I don't think we had ever met either.
We'd spoken on the phone once or twice prior, but not.
Yeah.
No.
In fact, I should point out when I wanted to start talking about mindfulness, just mind fitness, like everything that I talk about now, I remember I contacted you because I found out you were doing something similar, and I was worried about. Do you remember that? I was worried about stepping on your toes. I'm like, hey, is this okay? I don't want to like. And you're like, dude, rising
There's
tide
so much work
lifts
to be
all
done.
boats. Like it's
That's
totally
right.
fine. So, you don't want to kind of like steal somebody's thunder potentially. Not that I'm any better at any of this than you are, but it was one of those things, right? You don't want to like.
I appreciate the
grab somebody's
professional courtesy.
Yeah, no, but you were like, dude, yeah, absolutely. The more people we got talking about this, the better.
Yeah.
So let's talk about psychedelics. I've never spoken about it on publicly at all. So this will be the first time.
Here we go.
But I think it's important to talk about. I think obviously it's a very hot topic out there.
Very.
And I think, sharing our experience and our opinions on these things. And I'll say right now too, these are my personal opinions and personal experiences. And that's really important, right? What I say on here is not representative of any organization or anything like that.
Right.
So personal opinion, but yeah, so we went down and did this retreat and spent 5 days, I think, down there.
Yeah, I want to say it was 5 days.
With two ceremonies,
two ceremonies
over 4 days, I think, right, and 5 nights, maybe. Yeah, it was beautiful,
something like that. But we did this as part of it was an organized thing, communal group, and it was probably 24 people, something like that.
Yeah,
we had with us.
Yeah, we had a nice group. It was like 20, 25.
Yep, and there was
including the people. Yeah,
there was preparatory work as well. So we had a couple of group calls, like Zoom calls, with facilitators and other people to kind of get to know folks ahead of time, and then went on a series of flights to get out in the middle of nowhere.
It was awesome.
outside the country, but beautiful location. And then it's funny. I have a journal. I'm terrible about journaling as much as I espouse it as a principle. And I think it's great. It's one of these ones that I struggle with so badly.
It's tough.
But I wrote a journal when we were there, and I bought this on purpose before. I don't know if you can see that. For those of you who can't see this or just listening, it's on the cover. It says, "Life, you can't just run away from your problems forever." And then it says me, "I'm fast, very, very fast." And I felt like that was appropriate. But I read it this morning. I read what I wrote, and there was a bunch of stuff in there that it just goes to why journaling is important. There were things I'd forgotten about how I felt, about some of the things we practiced there. But I suppose we can get into the experiences themselves, but one thing that I want to say up front is the outcome of the experience for me, so much of what was beneficial went beyond just taking mushrooms, taking psilocybin. It was the integration, it was the breath work we did, it was the meditation we did, and it was the group setting. And that's something that I think it would have been such a different experience if I were by myself in a clinical, white-walled room in a bed with a doctor there. Not saying that's bad, but and that certainly could work for people. But the fact that we were all together experiencing this in sort of a, I guess, traditional kind of motif. We had facilitators who were watching us, who were, it was almost like shaman, right? They were singing, I don't know if that's the correct term, but they were singing songs the whole time, and there were candles, and we were sort of out in the jungle. And to me, that made such a difference. And then and then the time we spent together after everything we experienced. So, and in between the meals we ate together and just going out to the beach where we were completely disconnected from technology too. Nobody's on their phones. But I found that aspect of it so important. Just like kind of what you were talking about, your retreat, right? That piece of it. I remember sitting there and people are sort of telling their sob stories about why they're here and things that they'd experienced. And I think we go into these types of situations thinking, man, my story is so screwed up, right? I've got so many problems. And you hear, man, everybody else is pretty screwed up too, in different ways. Their problems might be different than mine, but it was just like, maybe I don't have it so bad. And maybe like we're kind of all in this journey together. So anyway, I don't know what direction we want to go with this part of the discussion, but
well, I mean, I'll jump in, and then we'll get into. Well, first off, I got to tell you, I got my journal here, Chris, and I'm not very good at journaling either. And I journaled there, November 19th, 2021, and the previous entry in this same journal is dated May 23rd, 2014, 7 years plus before. But the title of my journal, and I hand wrote it, is The Journal of a Midlife Awakening. Instead of a midlife crisis, it was a midlife awakening. So anyway, I just thought that was funny. I had to share it. So I got to backtrack a little bit for the psychedelics piece. Will and I had been doing the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast for a while, and I moved out to Colorado Springs. I think we were still on Instagram Live. I'm not even sure if we had started officially podcasting yet. And I met with a guy. He had been a pilot, and he had gotten blown up and crashed, and he had some serious post-traumatic stress. And we met for coffee. I had never met him before. We meet for coffee. He's like, "Oh yeah, I got to tell you, I went down to, and he named the country, and I did this journey on ayahuasca, and I was like, what? I had no idea. Because at this time I just retired from the military, like a month prior. In the military, we're somewhat fairly straight laced. The zero tolerance policy for any type of drugs. So I didn't mess with anything, quote unquote, mess with. And I'm having this talk with this guy. I'm like, wait, so you did drugs to heal?
Right.
Like, in my mind, that's what I said.
Drugs.
And I think I went from that conversation and I called Will and I was like, yeah, man, I just had this conversation with this guy, former military PTSD. He did this medicine called ayahuasca. And Will's like, oh yeah,
I've done that 6 times.
he like knows all about it. I'm like, holy shit, there's a whole side of the world and healing that I don't know about. And I'm talking to people about healing their bodies and minds. And here's stuff that I don't know about. So let me get smarter on it. So I went and got Michael Pollan's book called How to Change Your Mind, read through that, tore through it.
Yeah, me too.
And I was just blown away. Then read Stephen Kotler's book, Stealing Fire. Again, just blown away by the healing properties of these plant medicines. And Will and I are having these shows. I find out about the various nonprofits that are out there helping veterans with their post-traumatic stress through plant medicine. You've got VETS, VETS, Vets Exploring Treatment Solutions, and you've got Heroic Hearts, HHG, or HHP, the Heroic Hearts Program Project. And I speak to the founders of these, and I'm like, what in the world? And they told me that this was like going through 1,000 sessions of counseling in one night or in 2 nights, 2 ceremonies. And so Will and I talk a few times, and finally we get connected with this former Army Ranger, Neil Markey, who has since founded the Beckley Retreats through the Beckley Foundation. And, we're like, hey, well, maybe we should do one of these ceremonies together and experience it. So Neil reached out and he's like, hey, yeah, guys, if you come, you can share it on your podcast, talk about it, what it is you're doing, see if maybe other people from the podcast can come. So we end up in this undisclosed location outside of the country. And there we meet you. I think we all linked up at the hotel and had one small like puddle jumper flight from this area to like the middle of nowhere. And I mean, it was unbelievable location, away from like no connectivity to Wi-Fi or very little. I mean, only in certain spots. And it was just peaceful. And then we did that pre-work, right? So I'd done meditation, but I'd never done that really powerful breath work that like
holotropic.
I had never done holotropic.
That was trippy in itself.
It was super trippy. And I remember the shaman saying, hey, some people get more out of the breath work than they do out of plant medicine. And I was like, what in the world? It's just breath work. Yeah. And I came out of it, and Will was right next to me on that first breath work ceremony. And we were laying down on these beds, and we got these pillows right behind our heads. And there were 2 wet spots right behind my head. And I had been crying my eyes out just through the breathing.
Yep.
Like I had no idea that I could tap into that. Right. It was so powerful. So then, fast forward into that evening, and my personal experience with psychedelics was zero. I'd heard about it. Not psychedelics per se, but I've used cannabis, but I haven't used these types of psychedelics. And I get into it, and I'm kind of enjoying the experience. And I remember I start to get a little uncomfortable, and I flip my little eye shade up, and I see everybody else having their own experience, and I stand up. Will, I think you may have even seen this happening. I stand up, and I'm like, oh crap, I've forgotten how to walk. But I need I need to get to the restroom like really bad. And the one shaman comes up to me, and she's like super nice, super kind. She's like, do you need more medicine? I'm like, absolutely not. And she's British. So I'm like, I try to relate to her. I'm like, I'm trying to get to the loo.
And you're smashed out of your mind.
That's so funny.
I don't even know why I did that.
You said that.
I'm like, I'm trying to get to the loo. So she like helps me, and I come back, and then I tap much further into the experience. And this is where it's tough to explain to people who haven't had a psychedelic experience themselves. Yes, my vision was kind of changed, but I actually felt visions, if that makes sense. So I felt this vision, and I journaled about it in the same journal here, of 4 children playing, and I was an observer from the outside. I've got 3 young kids, and I walk up to this group of 4 children. Again, this is not me seeing it, I'm experiencing this. And I walk up, and I notice that 3 of the 4 children are my 3 children. My oldest daughter, my son, and my youngest daughter, all playing, having a blast. And this 4th child is kind of ostracized from the group. And I turned this 4th child around, and it was me as a young boy. And he was being kind of ostracized from the group because he wasn't playful enough, because he lives life very straight-laced and lives kind of as Commander Macaskill instead of as John or as Dad. And to me, the message that I kind of downloaded from that was, fucking relax.
Yeah.
have some fun in this thing they call life, and have some fun with your kids. So I definitely wrote about that, and I've since tried to make a very concerted effort to play with my kids much more often and have more fun in life. And then, sorry, I don't mean to be dominating that. I've got one more story.
Go for it.
Yeah.
So then fast forward to the next ceremony. We do a breath work ceremony again prior to, same experience, cry a lot, feel that just in the breathing. And then we get into the psychedelic experience. And I had gone in with the intention of forgiving and being forgiven, forgiving those that had wronged me in life, whether it was from the battlefield, whether it was from previous relationships, whether it was from my childhood, and being forgiven for things I had done and things I hadn't done on the battlefield, in relationships, and everywhere else. And I thought, okay, that's very broad, but let's see what happens. And I went in, and about halfway through the ceremony, I feel someone come and put a blanket on me. And, I want to say thank you. So I lift my eye shades, and there's nobody there. And then that experience, kind of the experience of the vision, quote unquote, comes back, and I experience this blanket that wasn't even there. There wasn't a blanket. There was nobody there. I experienced that this blanket was the forgiveness that I'd been seeking. And I had been blanketed with forgiveness. I was given the ability to forgive as well. And I came out of that, and Will and I did an episode of the podcast immediately after, and I think it was one of the most profound experiences of my entire life, and one of the more healing experiences of my entire life. And I'm a meditator and a mindfulness practitioner. I think those have a huge play and part in all this. But this was like just hitting the accelerator, right? That's what I felt. Those were my experiences. And then coming back to your point, Chris, about doing this in a clinic, I think there's absolutely value in that. But having the setting, the intention in your mind. I have since, here in Colorado, mushrooms are decriminalized, and I will openly tell you that I have tried them on my own here in my house. I had no responsibilities. Kids were away. I was by myself, and I did a huge mistake. Completely different experience. The setting was wrong. The mindset was wrong. All I wanted to do was get out of that experience. I could not end that experience fast enough, even though it was the same medicine.
For sure.
Will, you want to chime in here? Kind of your experience with this whole thing?
Well, I mean, this is, I've been fortunate, I guess, being the hippie in this conversation, that, I have more access, to these drugs, right? No, not even drugs. Like literally they call them medicine because they really are medicine. Like I said, I've done ayahuasca, like I think 6 times now, which isn't a lot, compared to other people, but like, that's just given me a tremendous amount of insight for sure. I've done acid kind of recreationally, and, it brings me into such a beautiful place as well. And then psilocybin, I definitely have used some recreationally, but in ceremony, I do like higher doses, like 3, 4, 5 grams, which take you into that, give you more of that psychedelic experience. And one thing that the way I've begun to speak of psychedelics and why they're useful is there's higher states of consciousness or dimensionality or that we cannot possibly achieve through sobriety. Yeah, we just can't. Like this, I feel like the psychedelics or breath work, like that holotropic breath work that we worked with, was developed by Timothy Leary to supplement taking acid trips, because like there's certain that's why the holotropic breathing kind of gets us into that trippy place as well, because we're actually robbing the brain of just enough oxygen that we can have a psychedelic experience just from breathing. So so every time that this experience was wonderful. And one thing I think we should talk about or mention is they had us journaling through the lens of accessing living your future self, right? Like
yes,
who you want to be.
Yep, that was in
right
here.
after this experience. And that helped me a lot, right? So just even journaling about it, I don't have, you guys are so funny with your journals, like showing them right here. I don't have my journal with me right now, but I do journal all the time.
I'm showing this as proof that I've journaled in my life. This tiny little thing.
There's another 3 guys. There's no
I know.
Well done.
Kicking our ass.
Anyway. And so from the experience itself down there, like each psychedelic experience takes me right into my heart. Like it takes me into this instead of like it just being this, the mind starts to play with like, fractal designs and stuff is kind of moving when my eyes are closed, and it's really fun and trippy. But, I didn't experience any like major visions or anything. I just a lot of the psychedelic experiences I've had take me right into this heart space, into the kindness and the love and the patience, and then it starts to show me where I haven't been so kind and so loving or so patient, and also times that I have. So it's like for me it was this constant like flow of different experiences the whole time, all like moving, teaching me about the heart, teaching me about how important it is to be kind, to be patient, to be humbled, and how to live that way. And it was like, I was, crying at times and laughing and just actually sitting up, and they had, you guys remember the music that we had, like they just played this amazing, beautiful music that helped to move this energy through us the entire experience. Like, they're playing guitars and singing bowls. I remember the singing bowl, Chris, and you really cracked wide open on one of that singing bowls at one time. And so it was just so beautiful. And especially like, what as I'm continually becoming more of this teacher, and now I'm studying more of compassion is where my work's taking me. And a big part of compassion is this common humanity. And we're able to like not just do it in a setting and staying in our own lane with eye masks on and not really connecting with each other like verbally or doing the best we can not to. But we come out and talk about it. It was such a great, like you mentioned earlier, Chris, it's like, it's not like we're fucked up. We're just literally trying to let the light in to experience more love, to experience a deeper connection to ourselves and more loving to ourselves. And therefore we can be more loving to other people. And I came out more humbled, more kind, more loving. I have two new brothers here as well because of that experience. And it's just, I don't know. I really enjoyed seeing everyone else transform there as well and hearing everyone's story. And it was just such an amazing, amazing time. And then I think I received a lot of benefits out of it afterwards. Like Chris and we did the 4-week integration program. And, I've talked about it before on the show, but this is like the apartment I'm in right now is because of that experience. Because it took me like, they took us through the 6-week integration course where each week we worked with a different part of that future self, and we were asked to meditate on whatever those things that were coming up, from the experience, but also like from our vision of our future self, and kind of literally authoring our own life. And I just would sit in these meditations, just see, a big, beautiful place with lots of light, big place, lots of life, big place. And then sure enough, in New York, I mean, it's fucking hard to find a good place in New York. And I stumbled into this place, luckily, and I fucking saw it, and I moved in as quickly as I could. And it's literally all the stars kind of aligned. And it's from that experience, I'm living more abundantly now. And that's kind of what brought me into this space I have. physical space, and then just open up the abundance of my heart and my mind, and things have really just transformed drastically since our time together, in 2019 or 2021. Awesome. Yeah, it was good. It feels amazing. Well, you had quite an experience, Chris. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah.
I loved the work that you were doing down there, and your willingness to jump in, and you just went there, man. And it was, you did. I mean, congratulations. It was beautiful to see. Beautiful it was, and heart wrenching at the same time. But like, I think John and I know what my experience is, because I've been in these ceremonies before. When someone is going through a deep experience and wrought with all sorts of sounds, emotions, and stuff, like that's what they need. And I was like, oh yeah, Chris is going there. Well, you want to talk about it?
Yeah. Well, man, I have so much to say on this topic. Like, I feel like this could probably be broken into a couple of podcasts. But so first off, I would say I came from a background obviously similar to John's. I was in the military for a long time, where there's zero tolerance policy. I wasn't really interested in taking any kind of drugs. I actually come from a family where there was alcoholism in my family growing up. And because I saw the effects of that, and I should say not abusive, it wasn't, but my dad really struggled with alcohol when I was younger. But he got sober when I was, I think, about 11 or 12. But I remember seeing him in the hospital when he was detoxing from that and what that did to him physically, and thinking, I'm never drinking alcohol my entire, like, I'm never going to go there. So I'm somebody who grew up in high school very straight-laced. I went to parties where people were drinking, and I just was like, nope, not touching it, which was great for them, because I would drive people around, drive people home. But things change. I got into college, and eventually, and then actually have had a fairly storied history myself with alcohol, not to the point of, whoa, sorry, what is that?
Life is complicated.
Life is complicated. That's
life is complicated.
Coming from the universe.
It was just
Rich Harris.
Thank you, phone, for reminding me, telling me about my complicated life. So anyway, that was
perfect.
But look, and then I've had my own, and I would say continue to have some kind of struggles with alcohol. Not alcoholic, but certainly, like, it's a substance that I know I have a challenge with in terms of my relationship with it. But I never took any kind of drugs. I mean, to this day, I've never, other than this experience that we had, that's the only quote unquote drugs I've ever done in my entire life. Never smoked pot. And I'm not necessarily all that interested in it. And the psilocybin stuff, man, it took me so much to get up the courage to go do that. I was and somebody who's like struggling with anxiety, it's like how is this going to work? Because this scares the shit out of me.
What was that, Chris? What was that moment, if you don't mind? What was that moment? You're like, you know what? I'm going to do this. Like, was there a particular something or other? I
mean, look, I'd done so many other treatments, and both mental and physical, and I don't know. I got linked up, John. Somehow you and I got connected. I talked to you like that you were going to go do this and that, and then talking to Neil, and Neil put me in my comfort zone a little bit, and he showed me stuff that, look. And I should be clear, I'm somebody who, I'm not out there proselytizing that everyone should go do psychedelics. I think it's, I'm not recommending any of this stuff, but I think that's to each his own. But if you're going to go do it, I think you need to do it in a very safe and with a lot of intention is really important. So look, I talked to a lot of people who had been through similar experiences on various different psychedelics. And part of what I got to was, okay, if I'm going to go do something like this, speaking to an earlier point I made, let's not jump in the deep end first. Let's not do the hardest thing possible. Let's resist that urge, and let's just kind of walk in the shallow end. Because if we're going to jerk the wheel a little bit here, maybe it's better to just, that's something I'd found, especially with chronic illness type things, is like jerking the wheel is a bad idea. Like, it's really good to sort of like nudge your way over. And so I had actually done some ketamine ahead of this. So I guess technically that's the other quote unquote drug that I've done, because that seemed to be looking at all these different things. Like, that's a really sort of soft entry. It's controlled. You're in a clinical setting. It's an off-label treatment in the US, so you can do it legally in the United States. And so I was like, well, let me go try that. And I I mean, that's a whole nother conversation I could have, but I'd had a good experience there overall, and I'd learned some things. And so it was like, okay, I think if I'm going to do something else, this seems to be the sort of gentlest thing. I've heard it called a teacher. It's natural. I like that aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And so it was, yeah. And then I talked to Neil, and it was like, look, comparatively in terms of something being dangerous, like psilocybin is way less dangerous than alcohol even, or tobacco, or you basically can't overdose on it.
Right.
Like nobody dies from it, essentially. I'm sure that's not 100% true. Maybe it is, but it's about as safe as you can get if you're going to do this, especially if you do it correctly. So I finally had to be like, just go do this, right? Like just make it happen. And so going into the ceremony was the first one. It's funny reading through my kind of notes here. I actually was more calm than I thought I would be. And I will say one of the things, even with all the preparatory work, I was still, I think, had an expectation in my mind of what it should be that was erroneous. I had read How to Change Your Mind. That helped me as well. Reading that book really kind of like, but because of that, I had this expectation, which is bad, going into something, experience like this, that it would be very visual. And Michael Pollan even talks about like when he's doing this and he gets up and he has to go to the bathroom and he's like pissing diamonds, and then he comes back and the woman who's working with him, like her face completely changes. And so it's like, okay, there's going to be some serious visual stuff going on. And so we drink this kind of tea, right, that they had the mushrooms in. And I'm like staring out in the jungle and just going, okay. I mean, I'm waiting for like a tree to melt or something to turn into a beagle or something like that, right? Like something like that. And I'm experimenting. I got kind of eye shades down, look, and then open. And I don't know how long went by, but nothing happened. And I finally sort of sat up and I looked around, and I could tell that everybody else stuff was happening. Like the looks on their faces, or the way their mouth was oriented with their eye shade down. It was like, wow, everybody else is experiencing something here, and it's not affecting me in any way.
Can I just pause real quick?
Yeah.
I remember after the second one, you must have walked past me at some point.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're going to say.
My mouth was like hanging wide open. Yep. And you're like, afterwards, you're like, dude, you were gone.
Yep.
I don't know where I was, but I was not there.
Yep. Yeah. I remember laughing about that, just being like, wow, he is out there. So look, the shaman could tell that they're just sort of whispering and pointing at me like nothing's going on over there. And they came over and they said, what's going on? I'm like, nothing. Like, I don't feel anything. I felt a little bit of warmth in my stomach, but nothing quote unquote psychedelic. Right. And they said, well, do you want some more? And I was like, I guess, I don't know. So they come over, she's like going to give me some more. And it was just the raw stuff. And by the way, the facilitators do a little bit as well, because it's part of sort of like being in the same energy, like not nearly the level we do, but it's like getting kind of on the same level to some extent. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I didn't realize going into it, but when you're on this, your pupils get enormous, right? Like they just turn into saucers. So her pupils, I remember her in front of me, were just huge. And she gives me, and I'm like, am I just supposed to eat it? And she laughs. She's like, oh, I forgot the tea. Hang on a second. So she goes back. And so she comes back, and I said, how long have we been doing this? She was like, time doesn't exist. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, Jesus.
You're having a good time. So I take this again, and sort of the same thing. Some amount of time goes by, and there's still kind of nothing. And I don't know if that was if like physiologically I've got sort of a resistance to this, or I think that I have a very, very strong ego, quote unquote, meaning sense of self for me is like super rooted, and it takes a lot to shake me off of it. And I remember this, luckily I remembered this when I did ketamine. The same thing kind of happened to me, where we did it intravenously to start, because I was like, trying to be smart and be like, let's go with the baby steps first, lowest amount possible that's going to give me some kind of experience. And I just kind of felt sort of drunk. I felt like kind of just kind of drunk. And it was like, well, I don't think this is enough. Can I give me some more? And I kept being like, I think I need more. And when finally I got to this point where it just like pushed me off a cliff, and I completely lost my sense of self, everything. And I remember coming out of that, and the guy who's with me, who's kind of laughing at me. He's like, I knew you were going to push yourself over. I just let you do it, dude. Like, and so I learned from that I need to do the work. I need to do some work. And it can't just be like a drug where it's like, this is going to just do something to you. Like you have to work with it. That's kind of the point. Right. Like it's a teacher that's going to show you some things, but just like anything, you're not just like a passive participant here. You've got to be proactive. So I remembered that in the moment when they were going to give me even more. And I said, nah, let me try to work harder here, so to speak. And one of the girls came over and kind of sang to me and did some stuff. They were even going to do some of the, hoppy, the stuff that they blow in your nose.
Oh, arapa.
Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't want to do that. But it eventually kind of happened. I remember I got up and went and I was reminded of this reading it in my journal, but I went up and went to the bathroom, and I came back, and the jungle just looked different. It wasn't like weird trippy stuff, but there was like like an energy to it. It was like glowing. And I was watching a bat in the dark fly around in a way that I'd never experienced before. Like when you see bats, usually it's like they just sort of like flash by your vision, either at dusk, like in twilight. But I could see every flap of the wings of this thing in the dark. And if you remember, we were on that platform, and I, for whatever reason, sort of positioned myself at the head of this platform where all these cots were, or all these mattresses.
Yeah. You're in the center. Yeah.
And I said, I was like, does anyone else see this bat that's flying around over here? And everyone else is doing they're in their own experience. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And then for me, it turned into, I just started thinking about, again, I had very, very little, if any, sort of visual stuff, the colors and everything a little bit, but it was so vague that I even read in my journal where I'd written about it afterwards. Like, I really don't remember. Like, I knew it kind of happened, but I couldn't pick out exactly what it looked like. And it was so minimal. For me, it was almost like it just laser focused my thinking, where I started thinking about the fact that I have so much to be grateful for, and I'm not very grateful for it. Like, I have so much to be happy about, and yet I resist the temptation to be happy about it. And I thought about my family. It was like, you have everything you need. You don't need to chase anything else. You don't need to go chasing happiness. And that thought just like all this, you guys remember this, all this emotion came out of me. So I started kind of crying a little bit, and then it turned into like really crying. And then it was like screaming, wailing. And it was just this energy that was coming out of me. And it was so visceral that it was like a workout. I'm like, I'm so loud crying, and I would have to like catch my breath, like, and then go at it again. And I remember being like, sorry, everybody. Like, I felt like I was bothering everybody. And I just remember being like, sorry, everybody. And a bunch of people kind of chuckled a little bit. And then afterwards,
I think some people applauded you, like cheered you on. If I remember, they knew you were doing the work.
Yeah, and because this went on for hours, and eventually I got up and walked up to the kind of the main area where the dining hall there, or the place where we would eat, just because I felt like I must be bothering people, and they kind of walked up with me, and I realized I'm monopolizing the time here on the discussion, but this is something like, if I were to really, I think, talk about this entire experience, it would probably be a few hours of going through each component of it. But I would say the short version of it is the key insight for me was it made me really examine myself and like what I was doing to myself. Because the other thought that came back to me was thinking other people were judging me out there for things that I may have done in the past or not done in the past, or failures from my time in the military. And this realization of like, nobody is judging you but you. Like, you are the only person doing this. And you may not have loaded up a gun and put it to your head, but figuratively, every day you were putting the gun in your mouth and just pulling the trigger over and over and over again, right? And man, that thought was so profound to me that I was like, there was just so much. I mean, it's even like charging me up right now thinking about that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for me, it was just, and I remember them coming over and saying, I was like, sorry about all this. And the woman you were talking about with the British accent, she was like, no, this is good. This is divine energy is what she called it. And, and then my second experience was pretty similar too. And the lesson I learned from that was, man, you had tamped down a ton of emotion. Like you had stored so much negative emotional energy in you. I didn't even think something like that was possible.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was so helpful was in the integration piece after these journeys where we talked about it with each other was I sort of apologized again to everybody like, hey, I'm sorry and they were like, no, you doing that actually allowed, a bunch of people said this, allowed me to do kind of the same thing. It wasn't quite as loud as you, but it helped me kind of release a bunch of emotion. And man, there's so many lessons I got out of that, but that was one of them. And it was just how necessary that is, however you go about doing it. This idea of like not suppressing emotions. And if you have them, you got to figure out a way to release that energy, emotional energy, right, in a healthy way. And it was just so enlightening, man, because it was so different than what I thought it would be. Again, I thought it would be this sort of visual, trippy, and that's not what it was at all for me. And it was hard. It was not pleasant. And even afterwards, I would say my experience afterwards, I had to do a ton of work. I had panic attacks afterwards. I had anxiety sessions. Some of the check-ins with those follow-up calls. I was like, hey, I'm actually doing a little worse than I was beforehand. The experience was helpful, but it was like, I had to commit to so much work afterwards. And I just think it's so important that, again, I'm not somebody who's just kind of out there like, everybody should go do this. I think that they have their place. You need to go about an experience like this like it's a marathon you're training for. And the experience is the marathon. So you have to train ahead of time. You have to take care of yourself afterwards, recover appropriately, and take it seriously. It's like a serious thing. And it can be therapeutic. Again, I look back on it now and I'm like, man, that really taught me a valuable lesson. But it was a hard lesson to learn. And I'm glad, again, that I was with other people. To me, that was such an important thing, is that everybody's experience is going to be different. Right? It's not like just some drug that's going to have the same effect on everybody. It's like it's an experiential thing, and it's going to teach you something. But it's going to be individual to you, and you have to be smart about the entire thing, take it seriously, and do the work. But if you can be with other people, I just think to me, that was so valuable, man. Like talking afterwards, talking in between it, being able to follow up with one another. Right. It was sharing with folks. Anyways, I've been talking for a long time.
Even this, what we're doing right now, a year and 2 months later, a year and 3 months later.
Yeah.
I feel this is a part of it.
Yeah.
This is a part of that therapeutic piece, because of the relationships that we form there, because of being in that same ceremony together and knowing that, I knew Will was doing work. I knew you were doing work, Chris. You two knew that I was doing work. We all knew that everyone there was doing some type of work, and that there was work to be done in that moment, but that there was also a lot more work to be done afterwards. It's not a one and done thing, which actually I would love to kind of throw out a question. Would you do it again? Would you do it again, Chris?
So
I have.
I know you have.
Right.
I know you have.
Yeah. I don't. Here's my thing with sort of psychedelics in general, I think, is one, something like psilocybin, it's a mushroom, right? I mean, it comes from a mushroom. I think we can synthesize it, but it's a naturally occurring substance. And the idea that we're okay in general with lab-created pharmaceuticals that will prescribe to tons of people, something like opioids, that will kill 50,000 people in a year. And that's okay. And that's a good, quote unquote, quote, good drug or legal drug or okay drug. And something like psilocybin, which is it's a species, right? It's a naturally occurring species. And we're going to say that's illegal. We're going to outlaw a species, which is pretty arrogant of us, is crazy to me. That is insane that we do that, and that we accept that, and that we agree that that's like okay or normal or makes sense. It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. And then specifically for these things too, is to your point, John, no, I mean, would I do it again? Potentially. Do I have any desire? No. Like, it might be something that I only do once, or I guess twice, right? And in the course of those 2 days in my entire life. I think it's important if you're going to go do something like this, you have to know why. You have to, there's got to be a reason. It's not just like to go trip out. I mean, like, can you do that? Sure. To each his own, right? But if you look at it as a medicine, if that's the way you're going to treat it, not as a drug, but as a medicine, then you are treating yourself. And you have to be very clear about like what you're trying to treat, that intention going into it, and then being able to do the work. You know, to me, it's something that before I did it, I had somebody who was experiencing these kinds of things say, psilocybin is kind of like it's a teacher. It's going to teach you something, but it's up to you to learn it and integrate it. And I think that that's right on the money. But no, I don't have any desire right now to go do it again. I felt like I got out of that what I needed to. And I had a much better relationship. The other awakening, I should mention this. The other piece of that experience that I had in the second time was I had kind of ramped up. My whole thing was like trying to get rid of my anxiety. And I had ramped that up going into this second experience, because like coming out of the first one, I was almost like a little hungover, and it's you go through a lot, right? John, I think you were too, right? You felt like kind of hungover after the first one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I wasn't doing myself any favors, and I was going into it with a little bit of trepidation and nervousness, and it was affecting me physically a little bit because of that. So I'm lying there after we take this for the second ceremony, and it's like there's tension in my chest, and I'm starting to worry about that. Like, oh my God, is this giving me a heart attack or something? It's like the worst thing you can do. And this is the part I do remember about visions. It was like dark. I had the eye shades down, but there was scary stuff. It was dark. It was like monsters and everything. And after struggling and resisting for, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, I just made this decision of like, what if we just let this be? Like, don't resist it at all. Just lean in. Right.
Yeah.
And I am not kidding. Almost like it's a cliche. Instantaneously, everything turned to no shit, like pink rainbows, bunnies, and
hippie shit.
Yeah. But most importantly, all the physical pain disappeared. Wow. And it was like this, it felt literally like a big slap in my face. It was like, you see, like the fear is the pain. Do you get that? Like the resistance you're pushing back on this, your fear of it is the problem. It is the pain. And man, that was such a profound, like, it was just like a you fucking dummy type of thing to myself. Right. And and those again were important lessons. I don't feel like I have a lesson that I need to learn right now. And it's not to say that I don't. I might, but but I've still work with that too. I mean, like you mentioned, the envisioning your future self. I actually read. I'd forgotten about that, and I read it this morning in this, and I was like, I'm still kind of missing the mark a little bit. I'm still not quite there. And that was a good reminder of, you gotta recommit to that. You know what you should be, and you're close, but you're still holding back on some. And that includes even having this conversation. Like, this is the kind of thing that would scare the shit out of me before to talk about this. I mean, at this point, everybody talks about it. I think we're good.
Right.
Joe Rogan and Sam Harris and everybody, but I don't want to speak for anybody else and what they're doing out there. And like I said, it's not like I would even tell anybody like, you should go do this. I just think if you're going to, it's important to do it correctly, and,
for sure,
and intentionally.
It's a great teacher, like you said. And I also think like my experience with ayahuasca, I did a ayahuasca ceremony. It was Memorial Day 2021, so I had quite the year that. And I didn't touch it 5 years before that. I'd had many opportunities. Like I'm part of this group, and every 6 months they would have, hey, we're having another ceremony. Hey, we're having another ceremony. I'm like, nope, not time. Nope, it's not time. Nope, it's not time. For 5 years, and then it was like, wait, now it's time again. Yeah, and I think there's like, when you're ready, it'll be there, or maybe you'll never have to do this again. But I feel like, it's there, and it's been in our society. It's been part of our cultures for since the dawn of I think it's part of a lot of scientists are saying like it's made us. It took us away from the ape and made us into the human.
That's a theory.
It's part of the theory, right? The stoned ape theory. So it's like there is something about like us. I
didn't realize it was called that stoned ape theory.
Stoned ape theory. Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
And it has its time and its place, but it has to be, like you said it. Both of us. I know you said it, John. It's like it just got to be respected. If you're going to do it in ceremony, and it's like work with the right shamans, like do the work, prep work ahead of time, do your research. Like it put me at ease before my first experience was with psychedelics, was doing ayahuasca, and I studied it big time. Like watching documentaries, reading about it, trying to understand, talk to people. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And I went in and like one thing that, like you had said, Chris, it's like, not fighting against it. Actually the Beatles, one of my favorite songs, I think we might've shared it on the retreat with you, is there Tomorrow Never Knows. And it goes, relax your mind, turn off your mind and float downstream. You're not dying. It's like, they really explain it very well. And that's that whole lean in to the experience. And if you just listen, lean in, do the work like you talked about, by leaning in a little bit more, or finding more of your breath, whatever is going on in those moments in that experience, it could really just have some incredibly revelatory effects on the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's real. I mean, I'm so glad it's more mainstream now than it's ever been.
Yeah. I do think that, my concern with it becoming so trendy and so out there is that people will jump into it too quickly, right? And that it will lead to what happens too often is, because of that, it gets kind of too many people kind of get into it that are not doing it correctly, quote unquote. And that leads to some bad experiences that then allow people to jump on and say, see how this isn't a good idea. And, we overgeneralize things, right?
Right.
So that's why I think it behooves everybody to treat it with the respect that it should have. And also realize one of the reasons why I do the content I do is because I want people to feel empowered to do this kind of work their own. Like you have so much power in your own mind. John, you prove this through what you have done to improve your own existence without any type of drugs or intervention or anything. You have so much power. And unfortunately, the messages these days are a lot of disempowering. It's a lot of, you need this medicine, you need this drug, you need to go to therapy. And those can all be good things. But we should start with realizing how much we can do on our own, and only go to those things, I think, not only go to those things, but think of those things as augmenting or helping in some way when you are at an impasse or you are struggling, and but it can't be for lack of trying on your part to just, again, understand how much mental fortitude you have and power to change your own experience. It's just,
I agree.
I just think it's so important, because too often the message is just the opposite these days.
Yeah. Well, we're powerful individuals, and these, the psychedelics that really help us if we're willing to listen and watch and do the work, it'll show us our power. And then it's like, then you come out of the experience like, okay, now what do I do? With this new power that I'm more aware of. And
that's it. But you're more aware of it. It's been there the whole time.
It's been there the whole time. It's always been there. It's always fucking been there. But I think it's also, to come back to that common humanity piece, it's like we get to empower each other, by having this conversation, by making it more like, okay, it's okay to go in this direction and do these kind of things. But then also, keep rallying around those epiphanies that we're having from the psychedelic experience, to remind ourselves of that greatness that we did experience in that psychedelic experience, And then how do we bring that into life outside of the psychedelics? Like, what are we going to do with this opening of the heart, the awakening of the mind? This shared connection that I've seen so many times through psychedelics. Like, oh my God, I just love more. I just want to connect more on a deeper level and let go of all like the frivolous bullshit that we kind of like talk about so often. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, so.
Well, anything else on that, guys? We've been talking for 2 hours here. This is
no,
man. When I saw that schedule, I was like, "Holy shit! What are we going to talk about that whole time?" And now we're past that. I'm like, "Wow, it's super easy."
Yeah. I don't know if we anything else on that realm.
The disclaimer that you got to put out there is none of us are medical professionals in any shape, form, or fashion. So we're just sharing our experience and what we got through it. But if you are, seek out that medical professional, somebody who has a lot more knowledge on this than we do, and then see what works for you.
So, why don't we wrap this up, guys?
Yeah. Brother, thanks so much for. Oh man, it's been really, like I said, this is part of the healing process. Getting back with you guys, we should do it more often.
Where else can people either collectively or individually find you guys in terms of your content, connect with you, whatever?
Yeah, go ahead, Will.
So I'm at willnotfear.com, WILLNOTFEAR, willnotfear.com, and Instagram Will Not Fear, everything Will Not Fear. And then also, John and I have the podcast, Men Talking Mindfulness, and we have a retreat. And if you're in the city, I teach a public class Mondays at 6:00, 90 minutes of breath work, meditation, and movement. So maybe come to a live class and have some fun. But, that's me.
There you go.
In a nutshell.
I just can't get past the Austin Powers. This is me in a nutshell, right? Yeah, so I'm on johnmacaskill.com/links. If you go there, that'll give you access to everything that I'm involved in, my social media, my email, my newsletter, everything else. So yeah, I'd love to be connected with you guys if you're listening and answer any questions that you may have about what Will and Chris and I have talked about. So thanks for having us, Chris.
Awesome, guys. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Peace.
Peace.